Proverbs is all about the principle of the path. So it doesn't matter what you intend. It doesn't matter what you hope. In the book of Proverbs, what matters is what path are you on. In other words, the decisions you're making are leading to a destination. It's not what are you hoping, it's where are you going. And if you spend more than you make, you are not headed towards financial freedom. You're headed to more and more bondage. That's not a mystery, that's just math.
Welcome to the Loving God, Loving People podcast, where we talk about what it looks like to follow Jesus in our everyday lives and how, in the end, all that matters is God and people. Here's today's episode.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. We are continuing our conversation, talking about Proverbs, talking about wisdom. And Chad, today, let's start by talking about everybody's favorite topic, finances, which when people in the church talk about it, people get weird. Outside of the church, people are like, no, please help me. Let's talk about it. What have you learned? All of that. So I want us to kind of break out of that mold because all wisdom is God's wisdom, and all of us have to figure out how to handle finances.
Well, let's cover the money in church thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets weird. I wonder why that is. So like other pastors, because I don't have a problem talking about money at all. And they'll be like, how do you do that? You know, I don't feel weird about it. I think there's a couple of reasons why I don't ever feel weird about it. First off is it's what I want for our people. I never feel weird about asking anybody to follow Jesus. And so that would include our finances. So it's for your good. It'll help you. I have no problem asking you to do it because I know the benefit of it, which is the second part of it. I have personally experienced, Katrina and I, my wife and I have personally experienced the freedom that comes from managing your money God's way. And I want that for everybody. So it's weird in church because it's, you know, I don't know. I think people think back to Jim and Tammy Faye Baker and, you know,
well, and that's
preachers flying private jets and all that crap. That's not where we are at all on any of that.
Yeah, so you're not uncomfortable with it, but I think to your point there, some people are uncomfortable with it because of whatever baggage, because whatever preconceived ideas or assumptions they have about, you know, those people that you mentioned, and people that have abused that to go, hey, you know, give money and God's going to bless you with even more, and it's a give to get, and it's a let's manipulate people with money and with giving, and that's not what God wants for people either. So let's dive into Proverbs. Today I want us to talk a little bit about what does Proverbs teach us about money management. So we've talked about generosity. We've talked about the benefits of generosity. What about just how to handle finances? Like what wisdom, as you study Proverbs, and I know you read it on a very regular basis, what are the principles there when it comes to how do we actually handle our finances and that you've seen applied to your life that have actually worked to your benefit?
Yeah, so a little bit of foundation here. Proverbs was written by the wealthiest man that's ever lived. Scholars say if you put his net worth in modern dollars, he would have been a trillionaire. That's a 1 with 12 zeros after it. So more than Jeff Bezos, more than Bill Gates, more than Warren Buffett, more than Elon Musk. Maybe add all theirs, you might get it combined. Maybe. I don't know what the numbers are today.
And just to clarify that too, historically, it wasn't that it was all just inheritance. He was very wise in how he handled foreign affairs and did all that. And I mean, he built wealth over time.
Yeah. So you have these statements of wisdom. That's what a proverb is, of how life generally works. There are always unforeseen things. Proverbs are not promises. They're wisdom statements, kind of like you reap what you sow. That is a general truth.
Yep.
So what I've done, to your point, because I read Proverbs almost daily. There's 31 chapters in Proverbs, so I read the chapter that matches that day of the month. I think I mentioned that in the last podcast. But I've gone through, I have a Bible at home, that all the Proverbs that talk about money, I've written a $sign next to it. And it's been a while. It's probably been a few years. But I had a season in my life where big financial decisions that we would make, I would literally just read through all the Proverbs that had the $sign next to them and just make sure I was doing things. Yeah. So good financial management.
Now, here's why I think this is such an important topic and why people, especially later on in life, they're like, okay, I need to learn more about this. For some reason, there's all this wisdom out there when it comes to finances, but I grew up and I didn't learn any of that. They didn't teach that in school. I didn't sit in my, how to manage your finances 101 in college or anything like that. If anything, I was just learning how to go into debt all throughout that time. But these principles are there And yet a lot of people don't understand what the principles are. Things like, hey, spend less money than what you make is a pretty good principle.
Well, everybody, so I'm going to throw out the name Dave Ramsey. There was a couple in our church that gave a testimony. They mentioned Dave Ramsey this past week. They lead Financial Peace University, which we do in our church. That was a game changer for Katrina and I when we were when I was in my mid-30s. She's a little younger than I am. So she was in her late 20s. I was in my mid-30s. But it was a game changer for us. But all Dave Ramsey's done is take the book of Proverbs and put it in modern vernacular. And he would say that. I've heard him say that. Proverbs is all about the principle of the path. So it doesn't matter what you intend. It doesn't matter what you hope. In the book of Proverbs, what matters is what path are you on. In other words, the decisions you're making are leading to a destination. It's not what are you hoping, it's where are you going. And if you spend more than you make, you are not headed towards financial freedom. You're headed to more and more bondage. That's not a mystery. That's just math. But the problem is, in America, we're being marketed to constantly. We think money is about stuff. And so we buy things we can't afford with money that we don't have to impress people we don't know, right? And you say, what do you mean I can't afford it? I've got this piece of plastic in my back pocket that says I got $20,000. No, you don't. That's somebody else's $20,000 that you're going to pay interest on. And so the book of Proverbs, if I were to put it in modern vernacular, is do you want to be the kind of person that pays interest? Or do you want to be the kind of person that earns interest? You know, you have to decide what kind of person you want to be. So Proverbs is full of those kinds of things. It's not a mystery. It's just math. Where are you headed financially? And if you're like, I don't even know where I am, well, that would be step one. Because to get where you want to go, you got to know where you are. And so you've got to do the hard work of you are here financially.
I was having a conversation. I have a friend who he was in ministry as a pastor. Now he does financial advising, loves Jesus, follows Jesus, very generous guy. And he and I were having a conversation. And he said whenever he meets with somebody, just to kind of assess, to your point, where are you right now? He says everybody falls into one of three categories. There's those who spend more than they make, those who spend exactly what they make and kind of do the paycheck to paycheck and, you know, everything just kind of stays steady, and those who spend less than they make. And he says, once I know that answer, I know how I can help them financially and where to guide them. So it's very simple to your point. It's mathematics. Now, to bring it back to what you said earlier, it's not a promise that if you save money, you're always going to be, you know, building wealth. And sometimes there's things that happen, crisis happens, medical things happen. And so there are exceptions to the rule. But generally speaking, spending less than you make is a really good thing.
Yeah, so I'll quote a proverb. I don't know the reference off the top of my head, but you can look it up in a search engine if you want. One of the things that Solomon says is the borrower is slave to the lender, which means the more debt you have, the more under a yoke of slavery you are. And so you've got to ask yourself when you take that credit card out and you buy the TV that you can't afford or whatever it is, how long do I want to be in bondage to this particular item? So one of the things, because you get practical, all right, we talked about that. So this is just one in Proverbs, borrow is slave to the lender. So at my house, at this point, we don't do car loans. We pay cash for our cars. We haven't always been able to do that. We've built that over time. Because when we started looking at it, if you buy a new car, you lose 30% as soon as you drive it off the lot. And so I actually started to looking at the math. How I used to think is like a poor person, like a person who was perfectly comfortable under the yoke of debt, right? I was perfectly comfortable with my slavery to debt. And what I would think is, this is how much I make a month. This is how much the house payment is. This is how much the electric bill is. These are all my expenses. What kind of car payment can I afford? Right? I think very differently now. And again, some of the things that we'll talk about even today and that we talked about this past weekend, my wife and I are at a place now where we don't have any debt other than our house, which is very freeing. Because when you have a lot of debt, you have the car payment and you have the credit card payment, whatever else you can think of. Your money's already spoken for before you've ever made it. So your money never really belongs to you. It belongs to everybody you're indebted to. The car thing. You buy a new car, you lost 30% when you drove it off the lot. Now current moment is weird. So used cars are way overpriced right now too.
Yeah.
But in a typical market, if you buy from an individual, number one, you're going to get a whole lot better deal. Number two, you're not going to pay any sales tax in Arizona. So when you're spending, so let's say you're spending $15,000, that's a lot of money right there.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to pay tax on it. And when you drive it away, it's worth what you just paid for it.
Yeah.
Especially if you got a decent deal. And it could even be worth more than you just paid for it if you got a really good deal.
And you let them pay the 30% drive it off the lot tax, so to speak, and you're not paying that.
So when Katrina and I started it, we both had cars that we had car payments on. I wanted to make sure, because we didn't have any money, so I wanted to make sure that we had at least one car that would run. And so I sold my car and we paid off the note, and that's all we got out of it. So we had nothing. And then she kept her car. And I had like $2,500. So I'm going to go buy a car now with $2,500.
Oh, yeah.
And so I call my buddy here at the church that's a mechanic. I'm like, I'm going to start shopping cars. When I go, will you go with me? So I at least know it's not going to blow up the first week I have it, right?
Yeah.
And I bought a car that a guy had for a long time. He was the second owner, and he only had it serviced at the dealership. Now, it had 160-something thousand miles on it. I'll confess this to you. It was a Mercedes, but it was an old one with 160-plus thousand miles on it, and the guy had it serviced at the dealership. I paid $2,500 for it. So for the next year, what I was doing is I was making, well, Katrina manages our money, but she was making a car payment to us.
Into your savings account.
So the car payment that we were making on the car that I owed money on that we got rid of, that amount we just paid ourselves. So a year later, I had 12 months of those payments to ourselves saved up, and I sold that car for $2,700.
Yeah.
So I made $200 on the sale of the car, plus all the car payments added up, and then I took that amount of money, which was right around, I think, $4,000 plus, something like that, maybe more than that, and I went and paid cash for another car. Drove that car for a year, and I've done that every year till about 4 years ago, because I bought an old Lexus. So yeah, I drive a Lexus for everybody listening, but it's a 2003, so everybody just relax. But it looks really nice. It doesn't look like it's a 2003. And I paid cash for it. It's such a great car. I love it. So I just kept driving it.
Yeah.
But you do that over time, all of a sudden you're not under the yoke of car payments anymore.
Yeah, and there's a reason why the car dealerships look so beautiful, and they have free coffee and free donuts. Little secret for you: the coffee and donuts aren't actually free. The people buying the cars there are paying for those. So
yeah, ain't nothing free nowhere, baby, except the grace of God.
Yeah. So another.
But even then, that'll cost you a lot.
Yeah, and since we're welcome to the car podcast. Since we're talking so much about cars, might as well just keep going here. Two types of things in life: there's assets, there's liabilities. There's things that gain value over time. There's things that lose value over time.
Preach it.
And the things you want to invest your money in are assets, are things that are going to gain value, generally speaking, over time. Cars, to your point, you buy a brand new car, that's great. Given the market's a little different right now, but in most cases, it's a liability. Cars are going to lose value over time, and so you probably don't want to park all of your finances into your vehicle.
Well, here's the rub, and this was probably why I went to cars. Cars are an emotional thing for me. You know this. For whatever reason, when I grew up, car was your identity.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal. So when we first made that, and it's probably why I got a Mercedes, even though it was an old one. When we made that decision, that was a big deal for me, right? Because most of the things we buy are emotional.
Yeah.
And the huge shift that Proverbs wants us to make, that Solomon would tell us, and that he does tell us in the Bible is, don't make money about emotion. Make it about the math. Where are you going? And the question is not how are you feeling. The question is, where are you going financially?
Yeah.
And what decisions do you got to make to get there? So even the whole deal with the car. So now I drive a car that I actually have a truck and a car. But that was earned over a long period of time, like 15 years to get to where we are now, where we pay cash for our vehicles. But man, it's freeing. And it doesn't have me. It doesn't own me. I own it. So one of the things that you got to think about is the borrower is slave to the lender. Now, it's different if you own a business because some things that you borrow, to your point, you're getting an asset with that money. So your house is an asset over time, even though there's a liability factor to it.
Yep.
But a car's always a liability because it's going to wear out. And unless you got a 1965
Collectibles, something.
Cherry Mustang,
Yep.
that you're going to sell at the auction, it's deteriorating in value. So
Well, since we're talking about math, let's talk about, go ahead.
assets earn you interest over time, right?
Yep.
Because we said that line earlier. You can either pay it or you can earn it. Liabilities cost you interest, especially if they're in the realm of debt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're either earning money or it's costing you more money.
So talking about math, I remember being in high school and some wonderful person tried getting my attention about finances. And hey, if you save this money at 18 years old, here's what compounding interest does when you're older. Well, here's the problem. At 18 years old, you don't really care about any of that.
No, you're not thinking about the future.
You're not
You're
thinking
gonna live
exactly.
forever. Yeah.
You're the runway ahead of you. It's so long, and all you can see really is what am I doing next week, and that's kind of how maturity works. Is you don't gain it right out of the gate. There, it takes time to learn some lessons. But what are some of the mathematical principles that, man, if you could go back to young Chad? I'm not saying you're not young. Don't take that the wrong way.
Dude, I am not young. I was at Young Adults last night, and I was like, hey, everybody, I'm just going to be your big brother for a second. And then I looked around, and I was like, nope, I'm just going to be your dad right now. Like, oh, man, I've crossed over.
So if you could go to young adult Chad,
Yeah.
and you could help teach some of these principles of finances, what are some of those things that you would teach young adult Chad that now you understand the value of with a little more perspective?
That's a great question. If I could get in a time machine and go talk to myself, and I'll just say this on the podcast. One of the things I admire about you, Robert, and I'm jealous, honestly, is that you've been practicing some of these things longer than I have. And so you're way ahead of the game being 10 years younger and practicing it for longer.
That's the benefit of being the youngest in your family is you learn from your siblings' mistakes and you learn from everybody else's mistakes and you go, wait a minute, there's got to be a different way.
Wise people learn from the stupidity of others. Yeah. Foolish people have to learn the hard way. So, yeah. So if I could go back to myself, let's say 21. I had my first full-time job at 22, meaning I'm supporting myself now. So I got out of school. I was actually working for a church across town. So anyway, wrapped up in school and got a full-time job. I'm 22. And I made, I'm trying to think, $26,000 a year. Whoo, big time, right? Well, that wasn't very much.
Yeah.
So,
well, for the record, that's more than I made my first full-time job 10 years later. So you were doing all right.
Yeah, back in 1994.
Yeah.
I think that was.
Yeah.
That sounds about right. Anyway, I would tell myself, you want to give God 10%, you want to save 10%, and you want to live on the rest, which is advice.
Now, real quick. So if I'm an 18-year-old or I'm a 22-year-old and I'm hearing that, and I just heard you say, well, it's math. I'm going, well, that math doesn't add up.
Yeah.
100% is more than 80%.
Yeah.
So just to wave that flag of if I'm listening through that same filter, I'm going, wait a minute, why am I giving 10%?
Giving first, okay? So when you give first, two things are happening. You have the book of Acts at play, the work of the Holy Spirit in your life, and you have the book of Proverbs at play, which is wisdom in your life. And both things you want involved in your finances. I want the power of God involved in my finances, and I want wisdom involved in my finances.
Yeah.
So I'm trusting God. I'm trusting that He can do more with less than I could if I kept it all.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'm doing is I'm disciplining myself to have money instead of allowing money to have me. And again, it's back to, does emotion and feelings run my financial decisions? Or does a wise path and a destination that I want to go, is that running things? And again, you do not want to be emotional about money. You want to be wise about money. And yet, everything in our society and marketing and everything else is trying to make us emotional.
Yeah.
So I would say give God 10% because, and now for me, 20 plus years of doing this, save, give 10, save 10, live on the rest. I save a lot more than 10 now. I give more than 10 now. But in growing in that over time, I've just seen God work. So anybody that says, well, I can't afford to give 10%, the Bible word for that is tithe, I would say that's interesting because I can't afford not to. I've just seen what God has done through the years. And it disciplined us because we really started doing it, Katrina and I, after we got married. I think I needed her discipline and help with that. But it disciplined us to really pay attention to our finances. And God also would do interesting things at different times. And I can tell stories about that if you want. But God always did more with less.
Yeah. And to go back, because you alluded to this, there's a cultural challenge of there are billions and billions of dollars being spent to make us discontent, to
Absolutely.
make us think, I must be miserable because I don't have whatever it is. And so when you talk about discipline, how do you stay disciplined in a culture of discontentment?
I'm going to answer that a couple different ways.
Okay.
I think if it's really a struggle for you, you want some accountability. You want somebody that you can talk to about it. That's going to ask you about it.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, now think with me. You would be amazed at how cheap things are if you decide to go the cheap route.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Katrina and I were just talking about this last night to some young adults at our house sitting around a fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I spoke at young adults, and then I went home, and we had an alpha group there, and that's young adults. So when I got home, a bunch of young adults are in my backyard. So anyway, and she was talking about how fun it was to go on a date, her and I, and when we first got married, and we would get Quiznos,
Mm-hmm.
and we would share jalapeno kettle chips, right, and get a soda, and then go to the dollar movie. Now, we lived in Texas. There's a dollar movie there. There's a dollar movie in Tempe. It might be $2.50 now.
I think, inflation, it might be a little, but they
Okay.
still call it the dollar theater.
That's still not very much.
Yeah.
I had in my mind when we got married, because my grandparents have money, why do I have any money, right?
Mm-hmm.
That if we're going to have a good time, we got to go to a nice restaurant. We got to have a night. But the truth is, we enjoyed one another at Quiznos,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Just as much as we have enjoyed some of the nice things that we've gotten to do over time. Clothes. You can buy used clothes that have designer labels and are very nice for not very much money.
Yeah.
And we've done that for years. You get to a point where you don't necessarily have to do that. But there's just so many things. You don't have to buy a book. You can go check the book out of the library. You're a master at stuff like this. There's just so many things that we think we've got to spend
That
money
was a
on.
really nice way of saying, Robert, you're super cheap.
You're super cheap, but you're brilliant at it. I admire it. Again, the used car thing. Why do I got to have a new car?
Mm-hmm.
That's costing me a whole lot more money. Here's the thing. If I use my credit card, let's go with a television. If I use my credit card to buy that TV and I don't pay it off at the end of the month, and let's say I don't pay it off for 3 years, I'm making the minimum payment. One, it's going to take you longer than 3 years. You're paying 4, 5, 6 times what that TV actually cost you.
Yeah.
So you didn't pay $1,000 for that TV. You paid $6,000. Is it worth that to you?
Mm-hmm.
You've just got to think about the math over time. But I've worn nice clothes that cost nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And, I got it at Goodwill. Or I got it in a hand-me-down from somebody. There's those kinds of things.
Yep.
I've had wonderful dates that, total cost $15.
Yep.
There's all those kinds of creative things. And when you get creative, a lot of times, especially on the social stuff, it actually gets more fun.
One of the things that I loved about making an hourly wage, which there weren't a lot of things, but one of the things I loved about it is it made me aware of what things actually cost. So when you're making minimum wage and you go to buy something and you look at that item and go, that's 2 hours of work for that item.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you go, I don't need that.
Yeah.
That amount of energy and effort I put in to gain that 2 hours worth of wage is not worth that item. But it's just it's a different mindset. It's a different mentality. And again, billions of dollars are going to make you think, no, your life's going to be so much better if you have that thing in your. It's just not true. And to your point, learning to just get a little food to go or make something at home and go watch the sunset in our car. That was our best date during all the COVID craziness. We went, drove a car and watched the sunset and just laughed about, we're sitting in our car eating dinner together, and that was our date, and we loved it, and we had a great time.
When we first started getting really serious about no debt, at least no dumb debt, no liability debt kind of thing, when Katrina and I first started getting serious about it, because we started paying cash for everything. If we couldn't pay cash, we didn't do it. And we would each get an allowance for the week. Mm-hmm. Take a guess how much my allowance was when we first started doing this. I'm like, how old am I at this? I'm like 34 years old.
$5 a week.
It was a little better than that. Not much.
10.
It was $15 a week.
Oh man, you were rolling in it, dude.
Okay. So but put this in perspective. So if I'm driving to work one day and I'm like, oh man, I want to run in Starbucks and get a coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If I didn't get fancy, I'm down to $12. Right?
Yeah.
And then, oh, wait a minute, I want a sausage sandwich too. Oh, I got $9 left. I mean, all of a sudden, you start getting real creative about what it is you need and don't need. I could stretch that $15 with all kinds of different things,
That's
right?
15 movies in Texas at the Dollar Theater.
At the Dollar Theater. But it just makes you see the value of the dollar that much more. So when God blesses you with more, you just handle it differently. Now, anybody that knows me, and you know this, because I'm teasing you about being cheap, I like nice things. Like that's just kind of how I roll. But I've learned over time to save for it, to wait on it, to look for the good deal, to shop it, to be wise, and to pay cash for it. And then that way it doesn't have me, I have it.
Yeah.
And all those are super important lessons. You read through Proverbs, diversification is talked about. A big part of Proverbs is what I call mind your business. A mentor of mine named Keith Blue taught me this. And he would point to his brain, to his head, and he would say, mind your business. And he would point to me. What he's saying is, know how much money you have. Know how much you make. Know how much you owe. And know how much you own.
Yep.
I'm shocked at how many people don't know how much they actually make, don't know what they actually owe, and they really don't know the value of what they own. Those things are really important. Mind your business. Treat the money you make and the way that you manage it like your own personal business, because that's what it is. And over time, you get to enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's not a. Here's the thing about God. If we don't do it God's way, it stresses us out. I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, the fish out of water illustration. It stresses us out. But if we do it God's way, we're free to enjoy it. And God wants that for you. It's okay to have a nice car. It's okay to have nice things. But God wants you to actually enjoy it instead of it being a source of stress for you. But when you read through Proverbs, you got the debt stuff, you got liabilities and assets, as you were talking about, you got the law of diversification. You don't want to invest all your money in one thing, you kind of want to spread it around a little bit. I had one mentor say, you want to have lots of udders. And I'd be like, what? And he would say, a cow has more than one udder. You don't want to get milk in the future from just one source. You want to kind of spread it around, right? Because one source might shut off. The idea of winter is going to come is in Proverbs. And so you want to prepare for emergencies because life is going to happen. Those kinds of things. I would highly recommend Financial Peace University. Yep. We do it a couple times a year here at Sun Valley, so you can go online and look for that when it shows up again. And it really just teaches the principles. And Proverbs, if you missed this past weekend, go online, watch and listen to that sermon. I'll give you the 5 things that Proverbs teaches about money, and it will help you. But there is brilliance in the Bible, and it is for our good.
Thanks for watching this week's episode of the Loving God, Loving People podcast. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and click the bell so that you'll never miss an episode. And while you're at it, if you found value in this conversation, we'd love it if you would like this video, leave us a comment, and even share it with a friend. Doing that will help more people meet, know, and follow Jesus. And lastly, you are always welcome to join us each week for one of our services right here live on YouTube. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.